Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com. Real life isn't always easy. Real life brings tough questions and difficult decisions. That's why there's Compassionate Conversation with Kathryn Tull. Say what you need to say. Say what you need to say. Every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, a show about life and the choices we make. Compassionate Conversation with Kathryn Tull on ubnradio.com.
Hi, this is Kathryn Tull, licensed psychotherapist and your host for Compassionate Conversation here at ubnradio.com, coming to you live from Sunset Gower Studios in Hollywood, California. It is a gorgeous October day in Los Angeles. Mother Nature seems to think it's still August, and we're all pretty happy about that. I don't think anybody's sad that the sun is shining. So I hope that you are having a beautiful day wherever you are tuning in from. And even if the skies are cloudy, I hope that you will be able to look inside yourself and find something to smile about, find something to touch your own compassion for yourself about, because we are here to talk about compassion and about bringing more compassion to yourself and to the lives of everyone whose life you touch. I am very happy to be here with you today. You may have been ready to tune in last week when our show got blacked out. That was a really interesting experience. I was actually all the way here at the studio. My guest had arrived in Hollywood, and we were informed that the power was completely out in the building and we couldn't go on air. So I'm so glad that you've tuned back in. And my wonderful guest, Dr. Michael Levittan, has actually just entered the studio. He has made a remarkable approach, getting here in just a few minutes' time after being stuck in Los Angeles traffic. Good morning. Michael's going to get settled and put his headset on, and I'm going to get him introduced. I am so happy that you made it. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Kathryn. I'm so happy to be here. Yes.
Welcome to Compassionate Conversation.
Sure, we have some important things to talk about today.
We do. I am so grateful to you for being here today. This month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and as I have been posting about on Facebook, and my newsletter will be coming out later on this week, please don't forget to go to kathryntull.com. You can subscribe for free to my newsletter. There's a wonderful article this month on how to deal with verbal abuse. And Dr. Levittan and I are friends from several years ago. We started getting to know one another because we're both involved in the International Conference on Violence, Abuse, and Trauma. Dr. Levittan is a leading expert on domestic violence and relationship abuse, interpersonal violence of all kinds. You work with both victims and batterers.
That's correct. Victims and perpetrators. Actually, when I first started, I started working with victims. That was originally. And
you have done a great deal of expert testimony, is that right? And showing on radio, television as a guest expert on the subject, correct?
Yes, I've done I did Tara Banks' show a few times as a spousal abuse expert and some other media as well. Yeah.
I would love for you to tell all of us, how did you start working with domestic violence specifically?
Well, I really think there are I could tell you the specifics of what got me into working in the field, and then there's always, I think for all of us, personal reasons as well. Specifically, I was an intern at a counseling center, and I was a new guy on the block, and the first couple of patients I saw were two different women. One of them had children, the other not, and they never used the term violence, never used the term abuse, but I got the feeling in that very first session with each that they did not feel safe in their homes.
Right.
One woman did not feel safe for her and her children. And I went to my supervisor at the time, very bright man, but he didn't really know about domestic violence. This is 1989. I had been prepared for child abuse reporting, but there were no courses back then.
Right.
On domestic violence. We're trying to bring it to people's consciousness over the years.
That's right.
And so I needed to seek outside help. And I went to experts in the field. I went to a women's shelter, had a meeting with those people, the Santa Monica court system, the city attorney met with me, and I started getting involved. And I realized very soon that this work was, one, very crucial work.
Yes.
safety in the home means safety for children going out in the world and building the next generation of a society, adding to our society, and crucial and also immediate. Things sometimes had to be done in a very immediate way.
Yes.
So though I was the new guy at that counseling center, so to speak, the newest intern, they started shifting all these calls that sounded like domestic violence to me.
Right.
And initially it was victims. They said, oh, give it to Michael. He knows what he knows. And so even though I was an intern, because I was so passionately drawn to learn about this, I felt I needed to. Didn't get the background in graduate school.
Right.
So I went and did the work and joined organizations and became very involved in it.
You
now, there's
yourself,
also,
you
there's
yourself.
a personal reason
Okay,
as well.
please.
The personal reason, I think, for all of us, when we look back on our lives, the jobs we took, the jobs we didn't, the relationships we stayed in,
Yes.
those we ended. When we look back, things kind of fall into place of why things happened. So when I look back on my life, I was brought up by my father and a stepmother. Mm-hmm. And they were constantly at war with each other. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that much physical abuse. There was some that I can still vividly recall, though I was 4 years old at the time, 5 years old. But there was a lot of verbal abuse and bad language and just nastiness. And
Yes.
and as a little boy, I would try to run in between them.
Uh-huh.
And they would, one or the other would chase me back to, get out of here, chase me back to my room. And anyway, I wasn't very effective. I'd like to think nowadays I'm a lot more effective in dealing with domestic violence.
That really must have touched a chord for you, and it's interesting. I just want to share real quickly that as I was getting ready for this morning's show and we were awaiting your arrival, I was talking with my wonderful engineer, John Williams. I was also talking with Tony Sweet, the co-owner of the station, and Ann Walker, co-owner of the station. Every single one of us has a background of some family violence, whether it's psychological, physical, emotional abuse, every single one of us. And it's interesting to me, life often is a microcosm. What we're experiencing in any moment of time can be a microcosm of the larger world. Well, here we are. There were 4 people present in the studio at the time. That's 4 out of 4. Now, that's not a normal kind of statistic that 100% of the people in a room will have had a background in interpersonal violence of some kind. But I think the portion of the population is enormous. Would you agree?
Yes, I think that maybe it's not 100%, but in some way everyone is touched by either physical abuse in the home, verbal abuse. It happened to you, it happened to your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, somewhere along the lines.
That's
there was
right.
some sort of, and the reason I think we tend to look away, and it's sort of underreported and underestimated in some way, the prevalence of domestic violence, is that I think human beings tend to, for the most part, want to idealize their parents and
Yes.
idealize their childhood
Yes.
as if that was a sacred time. And it was a sacred time, but people weren't always treated so well during it.
That's right.
To really recognize domestic violence and to own it in something that happened in your life means you have to sort of break through that idealization of mother and father in your childhood.
That's right. I really want to acknowledge John just really quickly, because as we were talking this morning, I appreciated so much that you were immediately willing to be vulnerable and willing to share. And Michael, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask John just to share for a moment, because we are talking about how most of the population has experienced domestic violence within their family at some level, whether they themselves were the direct target of the abuse or they may have witnessed it, or their siblings. So John, just take a moment and tell us what your experience was.
Sure. I grew up with my parents divorced when I was pretty young, about 5 to 7, right around that time. And I was raised by my stepfather and my mother. And the stepfather he was an alcoholic, so experienced the abuse when he was in his alcoholic rages.
Mm-hmm.
That would also lead to physical abuse to my mother as well. So,
Yes.
So it was tough growing up. And then on top of the physical abuse, there was also threats, psychological abuse, and
Yes.
Also a lot of blows to my self-esteem, thinking that I could never do anything right, because even when I would do something right, he would say, he would go back and mess it up and make it look like I messed it up and say that it was wrong. So I think that maybe made me a little bit more of a overachiever in life. But yeah, it was pretty tough. And the abuse lasted up until I was, I think, around 16, 17.
Yes.
And then by 18, I moved to California. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and I was flown out to California when around 18, 19 for an internship. So sort of like my way of escaping.
Yes. We have some static we're going to clear up right here.
Interesting.
Hang on. We're having a little bit of technical issue. We're going to do our best to clear that up.
I don't know if they're hearing it, but we're hearing it in our headphones,
Okay.
and I think it could be just... Okay. Wow. Could be my energy field.
Sorry,
when
audience.
I'm talking about this, it could be...
We've got so much passion in the room
Right.
about the subject.
Right.
Well, John, one of the things that you mentioned that is I want to just touch on, and I know,
Sure.
Michael, that you would back this up as well. Frequently, because people like to idealize not only their family relationships, but also their intimate relationships, when there's alcohol involved, victims will often say, well, he or she or the perpetrator wouldn't do it if they weren't drunk. So it's only when they get drunk that they become violent. And I think it's very important to state over and over again that alcohol does not cause violence.
Yes, many of the batterers I work with put the blame on the alcohol.
Yes.
And alcohol is a factor in many, many cases. But like I tell the batterers when I'm working with them, in the bottle of beer or wine you're drinking or whatever it be, there's no violence in that bottle.
That's right.
That bottle is just going to loosen the prefrontal cortex, the inhibitions, so whatever is inside is going to come out.
That's right.
And it doesn't have to be violence. It doesn't have to be nastiness. So it's the person themselves that's releasing that, not the bottle.
Exactly. And I think it's very important for us to state that so clearly, because people really would like to be able to shift the blame somewhere else. Oh, we have a caller, and we're going to take this call before our first station break. Good morning. This is Kathryn. Who do I have on the line?
This is Wilda Spalding calling you from North Carolina.
Good morning.
And I've never heard you before, but I'm just thrilled. This is marvelous, and I'm enjoying you and Sunny. And I would love to share just a little thought about something that I've done in my life along the lines of your story.
Okay, please do. I want to ask you a quick question. Are you having some static issues on your end?
No, but
Great.
I can hear them at your end. Are you hearing them at mine?
No, we're just having some technical issues here in the studio, but please do share with us your story.
Kathryn, we'll make it a quickie. Years ago, who I am is many things. Kind of like your guest at the moment, but about 40 years of my life, and I'm a certain old age right now, have been spent by going back and forth to the Commission on Human Rights in the United Nations, speaking up for mostly the people who had no voice, but with them and sometimes for them. Anyway, years ago, I was asked to give a major lecture in Washington, D.C., and it was a conference about vision and visioning and seeing what you could do to change the world.
Yes.
And I was saying, the one thing that I hear all the time, all over the world when I'm working and traveling, is, I'm just one person. What can I do?
Yes.
And they said, well, what's going to be the title of your speech? And I said, well, I don't know yet. Just a moment. I came back and I said, Powerful Peace Pixels. And they said, what? I said, Powerful Peace Pixels. So then I went quickly to the dictionary afterwards because I didn't know what a pixel was.
Uh-huh.
But I found out that indeed, as you know, it is the smallest piece of electronic information, so that whenever you have a screen, whether it's a computer screen or a television screen, that little tiny piece of light that is there is a pixel. And if one of them is out, there is no vision. So when people would say, I'm just one person, what can I do? Oh, you're a pixel. Wow, you're that important.
Yes.
That's my little piece I'd like to share with you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that you did and that you called in, because, of course, when we're talking about domestic violence, it's very frequent that people will say, I'm just one person. What can I do to make a difference? And we can make a difference.
That in my life.
Well,
absolutely. And it's not just, one forgets that it's not just it can be the parent to the child as well as the intimate man and woman in the child. Or it can be many of the things that, of course, we look at the UN is whole troops of military who are all not just HIV but AIDS positive that go in and use that as a weapon of violence. So domestic violence takes many forms. And now, yes, you've got a lot of scratching going on at that end.
I'm so sorry that you're hearing it too.
You and your colleague. I'll be in touch with you. I have a brain trust that I'm hosting in April. Do you know when you're done in March with your conference in Hawaii?
I will be back from Hawaii by approximately the 16th of March, so I would love to be in touch with you and talk with you.
I'll let you know about that. It's called the Spalding International Brain Trust. And
Fantastic.
It's been going a number of years. We actually held the first one at UCLA, but now it goes all over the world. So it'll be back east here, but we'll talk to you about it later. It's going to be from the 4th until the 6th of April.
Thank you so much for calling in. What a pleasure to meet you this morning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank
Blessings.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. John, we're going to take a quick station break, and listeners, we will be right back. Dr. Levittan and I are going to jump right into it. And Michael, you are going to tell us about the cycle of violence and a particular perspective that you've been able to develop. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with more compassionate conversation.
Shows that make you laugh. Shows that make you think. Music that moves you. It could only be one place. Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
Give our kids a break this Halloween, spelled B-R-A-K-E. Slow down in residential areas and school zones. It could save a life. This message is courtesy of Stillwater Packing of Columbus, Montana. For all your custom packaging, homemade sausage, and jerky, call 406-322-5666, 406-322-5666, or visit MontanaKeyserCreek.net. That's Stillwater Packing, thanking all their customers for their past years of patronage and wishing everyone a safe and happy Halloween.
Real life isn't always easy. Real life brings tough questions and difficult decisions. That's why there's compassionate conversation with Kathryn Tull.
Say what you need to say. Say what you need to say.
Every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, a show about life and the choices we make. Compassionate conversation with Kathryn Tull on ubnradio.com.
Good morning. This is Kathryn Tull, licensed psychotherapist, back with you and more compassionate conversation with my super informed and esteemed guest, Dr. Michael Levittan. Michael, let's get right into it. Let's talk about the cycle of violence.
Now, the way I see the cycle of violence, it's known as a predominant factor that occurs in domestic violence. And I see the cycle in this way. Every relationship people need to be intimate in a relationship.
Yes.
And they need their space. In the healthiest relationships, you cannot be intimate all the time. You need some space, some separation to feel that you have your own life. Well, in a violent relationship, an abusive relationship where there's imbalance of power and control, there's an argument, there's the explosion that occurs with the people, and then the separation. And then, as we know, the cycle, it says tension building, explosion, and then the honeymoon phase kicks in. Well, that's a way to take distance.
Yes.
People are violent with each other, verbally, physically, take their distance, then they're apart through hurt, through someone slamming the door and leaving the room, through threats to break up the relationship. There's distance between the couple.
Right.
Then the honeymoon phase kicks in. One or the other or both miss each other, and they come back together without looking at what the problem is.
That's right.
They rush back together.
That's right.
In a healthy relationship, people also take distance.
Yes.
But they do it through conversation, discussion, negotiation. I'm going to the gym today. The partner is going to meet with friends. Let's meet up at 6 o'clock.
That's right.
No, can we make it 6:30? Fine. It goes back and forth. It's negotiated. People have direct communication with each other, and then they take that very necessary space from each other. And to me, that's what really, one of the things that underlying the cycle of violence is the need for distance.
It's a need for separate time. A need to be able to feel independent, so that not only can you pursue your own interests or even just take a bath or a shower by yourself if that's what you want to do, but you actually are allowed to feel empowered about being alone. And in so many abusive relationships, because it is always about an imbalance of power and control, the ability to be alone is strictly limited and controlled by the perpetrator.
Very limited. And what happens is that in those relationships, people are so focused on whether they're close, whether they're distant. In a healthy relationship where it's negotiated, there's no violence, no threats to leave the relationship.
That's right.
People have more trust that they can be intimate, that will occur. They don't have to rush back together.
That's absolutely
in a forcible
right.
way.
I agree with that so much. That's a wonderful point that you made. In fact, this morning, I posted up on Facebook, in addition to the information about the show, that one of the heartbreaking pieces of damage that happens in violent relationships is that the victim's ability to trust and to even believe in love and even believe in trust is so deeply damaged, so profoundly damaged in a violent relationship.
But, can I say the but here, what keeps the victim in the relationship when everyone around her, usually it's the woman,
right,
is saying, leave him, leave him, leave him, is sort of like, it's almost like self-delusion. Your trust is shattered, but you keep holding out this kernel of hope that one day he'll change.
Yes.
One day he'll change. Or
Yes.
I'll make him. The woman feels, well, this is where it becomes self-blame. The woman feels, well, if I was a better wife,
That's
or maybe
right.
I'll be a better lover, or I'll be a better partner, I'll be a better friend, and that will make the difference. So they hold out this sort of delusion of hope that keeps them in the relationship.
That's right. And I certainly did that for a very long time. I was in a very abusive marriage for a very long time, and I certainly stayed because I kept hoping if I love him enough, he'll
That's it,
change.
yes.
If I cooperate with him enough, he'll change. If I make the dinner that he wants, wear the right dress to his event, talk to the neighbor, invite the neighbor over for
Yeah.
dinner, whatever he was demanding of me, if I only did that a little bit more. And I even went and spoke to our priest. My ex-husband is Catholic, and I belong to the Catholic Church to honor him and cooperate with him.
Right.
And I went down and spoke to the priest, and the priest said to me, well, maybe you just need to be a better wife. And completely fed into that entire delusional pattern and supported me to continue to be delusional
Right. So this
about
is
it.
something that's not just in the individual mind. If I was better, then he would change. It's something that, segments in our society, hopefully those segments are fewer and fewer, still maintain that type of belief.
Oh, hugely in the social culture, and so many of us are conditioned to believe that still. I have a lot of people coming into my private practice, even though I don't advertise necessarily in dealing with domestic violence. A lot of violent and abusive relationships have found their way to me, and I am always trying to provide psychoeducation for my clients about the fact that it's not only what you're aware of thinking, but there's the social consciousness out there that has permeated your thoughts and contributed to your belief system your whole lifetime.
And you mentioned conditioning before, and when I work with batterers, I try to help them with understanding how they were conditioned.
Yes.
For girls conditioned in our society, a lot of that is going back to what we said a moment ago, that it's the woman's responsibility to make the family happen.
Yes.
To keep the family together.
Yes.
And some of that is instinctual.
Right.
That maternal instinct.
That's right.
Not just for the child, but for the whole family unit.
That's
so
right.
then when a woman is a victim of domestic violence, that sometimes kicks in. She feels it's all her responsibility to make it happen.
Absolutely. And she doesn't realize, you hear constantly, well, I have to stay for the sake of my children. My children need their father. There's so much misinformation and misconception about the fact that somehow staying with a violent parent is better for the children than going through a divorce, because everybody has this horrific impression of divorce and what it does to children. And certainly it's not easy on children, and it can leave damage. But is that going to leave more damage than staying with a violent parent and having the violence escalate over years, which it always will?
Well, as I explained earlier, and John mentioned as well, growing up in that environment is terribly damaging.
It absolutely is.
And I mentioned the part of me being a little boy and trying to intervene with my parents, my father, my stepmother. But when I would go back to my room, oftentimes I'd be in tears and in
Yes.
fear.
Yes.
Are they going to separate? Are they going to hurt each other? It was just very hurtful to me.
So there's like a conflictual fear too for the children. You're afraid that the parents may separate, and that's very frightening, and you're afraid that the violence may continue, and that's very frightening, and the poor child is left with all of their own feelings and ultimately ends up getting a lot of emotional responsibility too, because very frequently the mother will end up making the child her whole world and sharing too much of her own experience and pain with the child.
Right, parentifying the child. My
Yes.
stepmother would talk to me and complain about my father. And I was, of course, the silent, compliant child who
Right.
would nod my head, yes, yes, yes. Sometimes she'd even tell me about his sexual. I mean, it was really
Oh, my
inappropriate,
goodness.
and I didn't know what to do but stand there. I was so afraid of her and afraid she'd leave. See, you mentioned that talking about the child, the confusion. Because
Yes.
there'd be times when they were fighting so much, I'd almost wish they'd leave.
Yes.
And then a moment later, I'd had fear that they would leave.
Yes. So it's so difficult on children. So for any of my listeners and viewers, if you happen to be in an abusive relationship right now where there are children present in the home and you would like some information and some resources, please look online. You can go to my website, KathrynTull.com. There are links, there are resources. Dr. Levittan, on your
I have a website, Michael Levittan, Levittan.com, also has resources and information.
So please look online and please understand that it is not better for children to stay in an abusive home than it is for you to leave. Even though it is difficult to leave, nobody wants to paint a picture that is false about how much courage and strength it does take to leave and start again. But it is very damaging for children. In fact, the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, has demonstrated that one of the most detrimental experiences a child can have in their lifetime is witnessing their mother being abused. And that single experience among the other 9 top experiences that affect and indicate that adult illness will be more likely, witnessing the mother being abused is one of the top factors in then later developing illnesses like heart trouble, cancer, diabetes, all sorts of things that you would think would be unrelated, but they follow in line because literally living in an abusive home undermines the immune system. So the effects of domestic violence are hugely pervasive. We are not just talking about one adult partner having a quote-unquote anger management problem. And I'd really like for you to talk about that difference.
Yes, well, there's some things about that. Many of the people who come to me, and I work with voluntary as well as court-ordered, the voluntary people is court-referred, the voluntary people we refer to as wife-referred. But in other
Right,
words,
my wife made me come.
if you don't get some help, I'm done,
That's
the woman
right.
is saying.
That's right.
So a lot of the people who come for domestic violence will say, I'm here for anger management. And it can be a way to avoid taking responsibility,
Yes.
not looking at the whole picture, just sort of minimizing it. Oh, I have an anger problem. Or, as we said before, I was drinking and it happened.
That's
And
right.
I lost my temper, as if it's one solitary event. But what we know about domestic violence, it's a pattern. It pervades the whole household. The victim, the children are all, it's the victims of power and control. In a violent relationship, I say, first of all, the batterers might say, oh, I only did it once. Usually I don't believe that
That's
because
right.
it is a pattern. And secondly, let's just say they only did it once. Well, once that abuse happens, that violence happens, everyone in that household is sort of geared instinctually to be on the alert for it,
That's
to have
right.
hyper vigilance about it, and that causes anxiety. You know, the story of, oh, I heard my father's car driving in the
Yes.
wheels in the driveway, and the whole atmosphere in the house changed.
Absolutely.
So many men want to say it was just anger management. And the fact is that when I do domestic violence treatment with batterers, we look at anger management, but we also look at sort of the insidious nature of a relationship where it tends to be male dominated. We talked before, I mentioned briefly, woman's conditioning about keeping the home together.
Yes.
For men, it's sort of like, I think it starts in their early on in life from their father, their early peer groups where you're supposed to be sort of king of the castle. You're not
Right.
supposed to let anyone take advantage of you. You have to have one up on someone. Might makes right. All of those things
That's right.
males are conditioned with. So now they're in an adult relationship with their wife, and they feel like, well, if I don't, then she'll take advantage of me, or she'll do this. So what I'm saying is, it's way more than anger management.
Yes.
It's about this whole pattern and ethos, the male ethos, that they have to be in charge.
That's absolutely right. I'm so glad you brought that
And
up.
if they're not in charge, you hear this when you're young, males hear it when they're older, they're called names. And
That's
the
right.
names they're called, I won't say them, the P word,
That's right.
the B word, this is what males will call other males in our society.
They will shame them mercilessly.
As if that's a put down, referring to them in some womanly way.
That's right. So boys and men, young men and adult men will get teased and shamed by other men if they don't want to be dominant, if they don't want to be aggressive, if they don't want to be a big tough guy and be king of the castle.
And
all
if they
of that
show
stuff.
any vulnerability. I remember as a child, I grew up in New York with some rough guys we grew up with, and we'd be playing baseball one week, we'd be playing football another, and another week we'd be jumping off a ledge or jumping off on top of a store, climbing,
Yes.
and to see who can jump from the highest one.
Right.
And the idea is, not only do you have to jump in front of all your peers, your male buddies there, but if you show any kind of fear as you're at the ledge there, if you show fear in any way, they're going to make fun of you
That's
or beat
right.
you up.
That's right.
So you have to jump, and you learn not to show vulnerable feelings like fear.
So the social conditioning aspect of this affects us both as victims and the perpetrators. We have been taught by social traditions how to men have been culturally conditioned to stamp their own vulnerability out and to hide it.
Yes.
From others, particularly from men, and they become quite afraid, you're saying, of exposing that to the woman in their life because they're afraid of being taken advantage
And to
of.
take it one step further, look what happens in a relationship when they're starting to discuss something and the woman starts to display, either verbally or with gestures, some sort of emotion.
Yes.
For the man to connect with that emotion, which he's been suppressing his whole life, means he has to be touched by it. He has to feel those vulnerable feelings, and his defenses, as he's been conditioned, say, no, I can't feel this. I can't feel it. And if he stays with the woman, stays present with her,
Right.
and you start to feel what the other person's feeling, and that he can't do that. So what he has to do is shut the woman up in some way. Either leave the situation, out-yell her, or be violent with her.
That's right.
It's another dynamic that happens that causes domestic violence. The refusal, the defense of the male against feeling any vulnerability, vulnerable emotions, or being touched by them from the woman.
Oh, my goodness. Michael, you are a very compelling speaker. We are actually going to take a very quick break and come right back to Dr. Michael Levittan teaching us more about domestic violence. And I really thank you so much for the power of your information. This is Kathryn Tull, licensed psychotherapist. We'll be right back with more compelling conversation about domestic violence with Dr. Michael Levittan. Stay tuned.
Now that you've found UBN Radio and discovered our quality talk shows, it's time to spread the word to friends, family, and the universe. 24 hours of music and talk radio without limits. That's why people keep coming back for more. That's UBNradio.com.
Hi, this is Kathryn Tull, licensed psychotherapist. Life can be complex, and your thoughts about it matter. If you've ever felt stuck and wanted answers, I'm available to help. Through my private practice in Los Angeles, by Skype and by phone, and through my book, The Next Bold Step, help is available. The Next Bold Step, learning to love and value yourself and know that you matter, is your roadmap to deeper self-understanding and moving ahead. Contact me at KathrynTull.com. Better tomorrows are waiting.
Real life isn't always easy. Real life brings tough questions and difficult decisions. That's why there's compassionate conversation with Kathryn Tull.
Say what you need to say. Say what you need to say.
Every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, a show about life and the choices we make. Compassionate Conversation with Kathryn Tull on ubnradio.com.
This is Kathryn Tull, licensed psychotherapist, your host for Compassionate Conversation. We are back today with Dr. Michael Levittan, preeminent expert on domestic violence. I am honoring Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It is a topic that I am particularly passionate about as I am trying to deliver my message about bringing more compassion to the world, being more compassionate with yourself and compassionate with others. Michael, I had told you before we started the show that I wanted you to talk with us about how you actually work with perpetrators. So please talk with us about that.
Yes, well, as I said earlier, when perpetrators come and they start off by saying it's anger management, it's not violence, or I was only violent once, or I'm not a violent man. They come in with so many defenses, and my job is really to reach them.
Yes.
And I have to figure out a way. It goes like this. From the very first moment, that intake, that first session, 1, safety. Do I feel safe? Are they feeling safe? 2, bonding. I have to create some sort of a bond with the person. And 3 is the information I get. Those are the ingredients in that first session.
Mm-hmm.
Once the safety, I feel, is somewhat established, you can never be certain in that first session. You don't know the person really. But then the bonding part happens. I have to realize that whatever personal feelings I have about this person, some people come to me with something that seems like a minor instance, if there's such a thing, quote, minor in quotes, of domestic violence. And some come with major incidents,
yes,
where they hit their wife, they injured their wife, she has a black eye, or they injured a child. And whatever personal feelings I have about that, and I'm emotional.
Yes, you're a passionate person.
Intellectual, but I'm emotional too, and
Right.
and I have my own feelings about it. But I realize if I just act on my feelings, the revulsion I feel, or the disgust, or the anger, what it brings in me, then I'm not going to be reaching this person. I'm not going to be helping him.
So you have to set your own feelings aside.
I have to take my feelings the way I see it and move them to the side.
Yes.
I don't want to do away with them. They're my feelings. I have to move them to the side. And the way I see it, I want to see the human being in front of me,
yes,
with as clear of lenses, so to speak, as I can. If I have all my emotions, I'm seeing this human being through my personal feelings. I have to see him for who he is.
Yes.
And then I have to figure out a way, as I said, to bond with him. So what I do is I have to try to empathize with what he's been through.
Yes.
And look what he's been through. If you want to just look at it, maybe we don't often do this. We think of perpetrators and our minds always categorize and put in a box. And there's all those associations with that word, perpetrator, batterer,
right,
violent person, all those associations. I have to see him beyond all that and through all that. I have to see him for what he's been through. And oftentimes they come to me and they're at a low point. They've been arrested. Some have been roughed up by the police, they say. Some of them say they never got a chance to talk to the police. They don't get a hearing in court.
Mm-hmm.
They've been restraining order, haven't seen their wife. Maybe they haven't seen their wife and child in 3 weeks.
Right.
And maybe lost their job, or their job's in jeopardy. They're coming to me at a very low point. I have to see them as someone who's suffered a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about to create that bond. I see a lot more, but I'm just talking about how to create the bond. And there's a way to empathize without agreeing or colluding with his denial or minimizing or blaming. And I think of it as empathy without colluding. And that is, I can say something
Why don't
very
you explain
simply.
colluding, please,
Colluding
Michael?
means if I go along with his position, that he only did it once, or that his wife was giving him a hard time.
So it
blaming
wasn't his
her,
fault,
that it
because
wasn't his fault in some way.
Isn't that what you hear all the time? That, well, if she hadn't done that, it's interesting that my throat's kind of closing up as we're talking about this. What I have heard so many times, and a lot of our colleagues have, corroborated, is that typically what a perpetrator will do is put the responsibility on the victim. They will blame the victim. They will say, well, if they hadn't done this, I've literally had a man sit in my room and say, well, if she wouldn't have said this, I wouldn't have had to hit her.
Right. Things like that you hear all the time. So what I have to do to create that bond, to reach this person, to reach this human being, is to let him know. I can say something very simply like, Jim, it seems like you've been really suffering, or you've been through a rough time. Now, empathy does not mean I agree with what he's saying. It does not mean, as I said before, I collude with it and go along with it. It just means, as a human being to human being, I can see that he has been through a rough time.
Yes.
That is what I sort of has to be more present in the early stages to create a bond with them. Once that bond is created, then I can, the psychoeducation, some therapy, I can help him see his part in what happened. And what I realized is that when I create that bond, there's always this either a verbal, a look in the eye, or some sort of verbal recognition, like, aha, he understands. Because this is something that people, I know I've been doing this for a while now, the advantage we have, like it's tough work. They don't want to be there. It's court ordered. They're in a rough place. They're angry. They're typically not introspective. They're action oriented.
But they are often filled with shame, I would think.
They're filled with shame, but you're not going to see that shame for a
And
long
they're not
time
going to
if you
admit
see
it.
it at all. Right. But here's the advantage we have, the leverage we have. I see them, though they're not going to admit it, they come to me in a needy way.
Yes.
Because if you're a batterer, if you're violent, if you're aggressive, people, even if you have a lot of people around you, they're going to keep their distance.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to present their genuine selves. They're going to be a little bit on guard around you.
Right.
These people, not only because of what they've just been through, arrested, restraining order, no contact wife or children, but they're also people who are typically isolated in a way, even if they have people in their lives. So they need people. They need understanding. So if I let him know, hey, Jim, you've been through a really rough time, it seems, I get that look like, he understands.
Right.
And then we're on the way to that bond. We're on the way to understanding. And then I'm seeing the human being, and I have to create that human relationship. And here's the thing, for anyone who works with batterers, sounds like rough work, but they do need you. If you play it right and you're in tune with them, you'll see the trust start to build.
So I need to bring something up because I think that you know that I am a survivor of long-term domestic violence.
Yes.
So it's one of the questions that I wanted us to talk about, and we're actually down to the last several minutes of the show, believe it or not. But the question arises for me, how do we have compassion for perpetrators, since my message is about compassion? How do we have compassion for perpetrators, and should we? And what arises for me as you're talking, and you're talking with great education and experience about how to create a bond with a perpetrator. And I, as a clinician, I can appreciate everything that you're saying because, of course, we go through those same steps with anybody that we're starting a treatment relationship with. But as a victim, hearing you talk about empathizing with what the perpetrator has just been through, and of course, you know, my mind is going off into this dialogue of, oh my gosh, I'm not at all prepared to feel badly for someone who has just finished beating their wife and they finally got arrested for it, because the truth usually is, how many other instances have there been before somebody finally called the police? It's almost never an isolated incident, and it's almost never the first time that somebody calls the police. We both know that the statistics are that anywhere between 7 to 25 occurrences will happen before
Correct.
the victim will actually take action on it. So my question for all of the people who are listening to the show who may in fact be victims, if they are perpetrators, I hope you are hearing that Dr. Michael Levittan is talking about how important it is to establish empathy. But I just want to say, for the victims out there, my question is, do we have to feel compassionate? Do we have to forgive the perpetrator who may have been extremely violent to, in my case, nearly costing me my life?
The first thing a victim has to do is take care of herself and her children and build her own life. Does she have to feel compassion for the perpetrator? I say no, she does not. I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who does treatment.
Yes, okay.
I have a long-term goal to get this batterer to be nonviolent, and then to stop the physical violence, stop the verbal abuse, stop the intimidating tactics that he uses. You go from, it's not from A to B. It's from A to B to C to D with some regression along the way, and then back on the course. So I have a long-term goal.
Yes.
But for the victim themselves, they have to take care of themselves. I'm not suggesting this for victims out there. Compassion is something that I think it sort of reaches into our capacity to love. And love, I think, as we grow older and get more mature, that definition of what love is changes.
Yes.
A woman who's been a victim of domestic violence, if her children have been abused at all, that love has to be for herself and her child. Whether she has compassion or not for the victim,
for the perpetrator,
for the perpetrator, that may be years in the making. That might take to see some real change in a perpetrator.
Yes.
And it definitely requires some separation from the perpetrator. Too many women get back. So what I'm saying is, from my perspective, I have a long-term goal here.
Right.
I'm not intimately involved with this guy. I have to reach that goal as quickly as I can, but it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen by telling the guy, hey, you did wrong. You can't do that.
Right.
Now, once I establish that bond, that's why it's so crucial. You wouldn't believe how direct I can get with the batterer. Then I can. If I feel a strong bond, I can look that guy in the eye. Once we have that creation of the bond and the trust has been established, and
Yes.
say, hey, man, you can't treat your wife like that. I can be that direct, but I have to go through some steps first.
What kind of results do you see in your programs? And thank you very much for clearing that up, because, and I'll ask that question again in a moment, a lot of people have asked me this question over the years, well, do you forgive him? And there's so much conversation going on right now about forgiveness. Everybody wants everybody to forgive everything that's ever happened to them, because the talk out there is that you can't advance spiritually if you don't forgive, you can't have peace if you don't forgive. And as a victim of long-term domestic violence, it has been very hard for me to approach the question of, do I forgive him? And a number of years ago, I was interviewed on a television show in which I was asked, do you forgive your batterer? And what I said then, I will still say today. I understand from a very human perspective that the man who hurt me was a very, very wounded human being, and I forgive that part of him, but I don't forgive the adult who had choice over the way he behaved toward me and toward our children. I find those acts unforgivable. So I think it's really important for people to hear that from a clinical point of view, from a treatment point of view, it is imperative for empathy to be established, for bonding to occur, so that effective treatment can happen.
Right, and I want to emphasize, empathy does not mean I agree with what I'm hearing.
Good.
And what you just mentioned, there's where the compassion kicks in, that every batterer who comes has learned this behavior, has experienced this behavior, has been a victim themselves somewhere along the line.
Yes.
But, when you mention forgiveness, I think that would be a whole other show. What is forgiveness?
Yeah, well, we
People
could certainly
define
do
it in
that.
different ways.
So
the expression, you can forgive, but you don't forget.
That's right.
There's so many different ways to define what that is.
That's right. So we only have a couple of minutes left, Michael. Before we have to wrap completely, I want to make sure that you give all of your contact information to my listeners and viewers, please. So how could they find out more about you?
All right. Well, I'm Dr. Michael Levittan. Levittan is my name, and the website I mentioned before, www.michaellevittan.com, and you could just Google me. I have many
and a
listings.
lot comes up.
and a lot comes up. I do a lot of teaching at UCLA and other places. I do seminars. I also specialize not just domestic violence and anger management, but in trauma, post-traumatic stress,
Yes.
parenting, child abuse. These are other things I specialize in as well.
I would love to have you back on the show to talk about that, because that also is an area of expertise for me as well, and I think we could have a really wonderful conversation about that. So please, if you'd like to know more about Dr. Levittan, it's Michael Levittan, Levittan.com. Also go to my website, Kathryn Tull, KathrynTull.com. We both have resources and links available. Information about how to contact us for our private practice is available on each of our websites. I work with clients by phone and by Skype in addition to my private practice. Michael teaches and does seminars and trainings. So there's a lot of information, and there are a lot of resources that are available to you if you would like to know more. If you are, in fact, in an abusive relationship, I have a specific handout that I'd be happy to email you. And please do reach out and get more information. We have half a minute, Michael.
I just want to say this. I just very much appreciate being here. I appreciate your listeners, because we often think of to have peace in the world, and the focus is so much on what's happening in the world, the president and the different leaders of different countries, the United Nations, what's going to happen in Syria, what's going to happen in the Mideast here and there. But what we're doing, the work we're trying to accomplish, that's top down. We're doing bottom up.
That's
if
right.
we work to create a safe home, then children are going to grow up safe. They're going to perpetuate safety
That's right.
generationally.
That's
and,
right.
and healthy relationships. So it's very crucial work. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. Thank you, Kathryn.
Thank you, Michael. John, what's our actual time? Do we have 1 or 2 minutes left?
We're actually at
We're right
1
at the
minute,
hour.
Yeah.
All right. So I would have loved to respond, Michael. I think I just have to ask you to come back on, and we'll do another 1 or 2 or 6 episodes together because you have so much richness to share with us, and I really appreciate that. So on that note, this is Kathryn Tull, licensed psychotherapist, your host for Compassionate Conversation. Please join us next week. I have another preeminent expert on domestic violence, Alice Laviolette, world-renowned author who wrote It Can Happen to Anyone, coming on to talk with us more about the prevalence of domestic violence. Please tune in again next week. Check out Dr. Michael Levittan, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much for listening. Many blessings.
Real life isn't always easy. Real life brings tough questions and difficult decisions. That's why there's Compassionate Conversation with Kathryn Tull.
Say what you need to say. Say what you need to say.
Every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, a show about life and the choices we make. Compassionate Conversation with Kathryn Tull on ubnradio.com.
Sometimes you can't get ahead. It's hard to get out of bed when clouds are knocking on your door. You're standing on a ledge, getting closer to the edge. Nothing seems to matter anymore.